united with Christ. Meet local churches with open doors, serving throughout the Border Valley community and sharing the truth and hope of God's love and salvation. A presentation of Live Christian Broadcasting Television. And now, united with Christ.
Welcome to United with Christ. I'm Dan Gamwell, and I'm very happy to be with you today. I was with you last week when I was sharing Currently Fulfilling Bible Prophecy. I do have a program, 16 programs that air on this station. But last week, we were able to go through a bunch of the prophecies all at once. Rather than you just seeing a couple of prophecies, as you do in each one of the programs, we went through a dozen of the prophecies that were prophesied over 2,000 years ago to occur at this point and are now happening. We went through them all. So that was kind of a fun thing to do. I enjoyed that. What I want to share with you today, though, is many of you know that I've been dealing with cancer. 2.5 years ago, the doctor told me that I had advanced and aggressive cancer. And the way that it happened was I got my PSA checked. You know, I'm getting up there in years now. In fact, just recently turned 70 years old. So I thought, 2.5 years ago, I said, I need to probably get a PSA check. So I went to a laboratory and just walked in Houston and gave some blood. And I got the results, and this is the results. I want you to see the results here. This is actually what they showed me, that my PSA was 23.52, and that for my age at that time, it should have been below 4.5. So this is a very, very bad thing. Now I'm going to tell you the story of what happened, but before I do, I want to share some Bible verses with you. I want to share a Bible story with you, actually, an interesting story, because I think it has to do with my journey of dealing with cancer. It's the story of Naaman. You can read it in 2 Kings 5, and here's the way it goes. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. Aram is what is now Syria. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, this young girl, "If only my master, Naaman, would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you so you can cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy?" See how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me? The king couldn't cure someone's leprosy. The king actually wasn't a good king, and he wasn't someone who respected God. And so he just couldn't believe he was getting this letter from a king from a neighboring country who, incidentally, had been harassing his country for years, and now he's trying to pick a fight by sending someone for him to cure his leprosy. However, when Elisha, the man of God, the prophet, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure my leprosy." He was insulted that Elisha just sent his servant outside and said, "Well, tell the guy to go to the river and dip himself 7 times. No, that's not what Naaman expected. Naaman expected for Elisha to come out and some big prayer and waving his hands and in some dramatic way heal his leprosy. Not in this humble way of just going and dipping in a river. He wasn't ready for that. That's not what he expected. So he went away angry. But, let's see. Yeah. Okay, so, are not Abana and Pharpar the rivers of... This is what Naaman said. So are not Abana and Pharpar the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and went off in a rage. I want to look at another verse, though, before we continue with that story. I want to look at this verse in Matthew 9:27-29. Look at this. As Jesus went out from there, 2 blind men followed him, calling out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." When he had gone indoors, the blind men came to him, and he asked them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" "Yes, Lord," they replied. Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." Okay? This is a very important truth to understand about our relationship with God. There's a lot of people that don't believe that God does miracles. And guess what? They'll never see a miracle. Why not? Because they don't have faith. And God says, according to your faith, it'll be done unto you. That's what he told these 2 blind men. And of course, they were healed. So, Naaman obviously didn't have faith and in what the prophet Elisha had told him to do. So let's get back to the story of Naaman. Naaman's servant went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? If he'd have told you to push a peanut with your nose for a mile, you'd have probably done it. But here he's just asking you to dip in a river. Is that really a big deal?" So, continuing with verse 14, so he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all of his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel." Now I want to ask you a question. Do you think that the river Jordan cured Naaman's leprosy? If that was the case, all the lepers in the area would have been scrambling for that river. In fact, I bet there were. I bet there were a lot of people that said, "You know, Naaman, he had leprosy and he went down to the river and he dipped in it 7 times and he was healed. This is amazing. Let's all get down there." And so they would, I'm sure there was a rush for the river. And they weren't healed. The reason they weren't healed was because Naaman was not healed because of the river. Naaman was healed because of his obedience to what God had told him to do through the prophet. This is an important thing to understand. Every now and then I read of people that are rushing to here and rushing to there because there was a miracle that happened there. And so they think if I get to that place, then God will do a miracle for me too. But that's not the way God works. God works, his ways are above our ways, he says. And what he's interested in is obedience, not rituals, not traditions, not things like that. Man looks on the outward appearance. God looks on the heart. God's always interested in the heart. He's interested in what's going on in our spirit, and he wants to have a relation. It's all about the relationship with him. That's really what it's all about, our relationship with him. And that's what he's interested in. And so going to a place where there's been miracles before, or touching some statue or some stone or some cloth or whatever, that's not going to bring a miracle from God. Obedience to God is what will bring a miracle from God. In fact, look at this verse. We have a lot of verses where God talks about promises that he wants to make for us, things he wants to do for us. Here's one, 1 Peter 3:7. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner, and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Wow. So, there are people whose prayers aren't being, men, husbands, whose prayers are not being listened to. God is ignoring their prayers. Why? Because they're not doing what he asked them to do. He said, I want you to treat your wives right, because if you don't, I'm not going to listen to your prayers. That's an amazing thing. We're going to see a whole lot of other prophets, or a lot of other promises from God here that are linked to prerequisites. And unless we understand that, we can't expect God to fulfill his part if we're not fulfilling our part. Look at this next verse here. Matthew 6:33, maybe my favorite verse. It says, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Well, what are all these things he's talking about? Well, if you read that chapter, he's talking about where you live and what you eat and what you wear and all the necessities of life, all the things that we all stress about and worry about. He says, I'll take care of all those things if you will seek first God's stuff. You put attention on my stuff, and then you watch how I take care of your stuff. And what do? We do the exact opposite. Instead of putting attention on God's stuff, we're worried about all this other stuff, right? And we're stressing about it. And instead of doing the one thing that could actually bring a solution, and that is to seek first our relationship with him. Pay attention to that, and then let God fulfill his promise to supply our needs. Let's look at the next verse here. James 5:16. The fervent prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. Fervent prayer, not just a rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub kind of a prayer, but a fervent prayer, one that's sincere and from somebody who is really in the struggle, in the fight to do what's right. They're really pursuing a relationship with Jesus, a righteous person, okay? That doesn't mean a perfect person, but it means a person who is really putting attention on their relationship with the Lord and trying to be faithful to the Lord, be obedient to the Lord, and develop their relationship with him. That's the person whose prayer God is going to listen to. A lot of people, their prayers aren't being listened to, and they're not sure why. They can't understand why God won't listen to their prayers. Well, they need to read the whole verse. For example, how about this? Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and then He'll direct your paths. Yes, we want God to direct our paths, but look at what He says here. He says, trust in the Lord with all your heart first of all. Second of all, don't lean on your own understanding. Don't think you're smarter than God. And in all your ways, submit to Him. Now, how do you submit to Him in all your ways? Whenever you have a decision, whenever I have a decision, I ask the Lord, what's your will here? What's the right thing to do? I want to do the right thing. So please, lead me and guide me. That's including Him in your life. That's submitting your ways to Him. That's what He wants you to do. And when you do that, then He's going to direct your paths. Let's look at another verse, Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for good, for the good of those who love Him and who have been called according to His purpose. A lot of people love this verse, the first part of it. All things work together for good. Haven't you ever heard, I'm sure you've heard someone repeat that, right? All things work together for good. People love to say that. But they often leave off the important part of that verse. All things work together for good to those who love God and are doing what He wants them to do. Those are the people that can expect God to be faithful and work all things out for good. Yes, we run into situations in our lives that are like my cancer. It's not a convenient thing, not a fun thing. It's a problem. It's a stress point. But He says, if we love Him and we're doing what He tells us to do, then we can expect Him to take care of those things. Let's look at Hebrews 12:1, which says this, wherefore, seeing we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. Sin causes problems. Sin brings issues. Sin blocks God's blessing. And so we need to resist it. We need to resist it if we want to see God's working hand, His miraculous hand in our lives. 1 Samuel 15:23 says this, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as idolatry. Now, we all know that idolatry is bad, and we all know that witchcraft is bad, but did you realize that rebellion is like witchcraft, and stubbornness, selfishness is like idolatry? See, these are things that are kind of inside. I mean, yeah, if I go out and commit, some heinous crime of killing someone or something like that, that's on the outside. If I steal, that's something that's on the outside that's obvious to everyone. But there's other sins that can block God's blessing. Listen to this. Other sins that can block God's blessing, and they're not so obvious. They're not so obvious. They're because they're attitudes of the heart. And God's looking at the heart. And so rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft. Well, witchcraft is certainly going to stop God's blessing in your life. Well, rebellion will too. And stubbornness, selfishness, I want my way. That will block God's blessing in your life as much as idolatry will. So we need to look at these things that can be blocking God's blessing. God wants to bless us. He wants to bless us. But He can't when we're not doing what He's asked us to do. And 1 Peter 1:16 says this, be holy, for I am holy. Hebrews 12:14 says, make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Wow. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to get to the door of heaven and they're going to expect to get in and they're going to hear these words from God. What did you think I meant when I said, without holiness, no one will see the Lord? What did you think I meant when I said that? Was there something unclear about that? But you say, well, I can't be holy. I can't be perfect. No, you can't be perfect. But you can be in, as I say in Spanish, en la lucha de hacer lo bueno. That means in the fight to do what's right. And that's what God expects from us. And of course, God makes us holy in the fact that Jesus died on a cross, paid the penalty for our sin. So before God, we're as if we had no sin. Yes, I get that. But that doesn't mean that we can just go on living like the devil. No, we can't. That will block God's blessing in our life. God expects us to live a holy life. And sometimes that can take years to really develop in your life. And that's something that the Lord is teaching me more and more about now, especially now as I'm dealing with this issue of cancer. So let's get back to my cancer report that I had. So this was up in the left-hand corner. You can see there it says it was October 16th of 2020 when I got this first report. And my PSA was 23.25, and it should have been below 5. And I didn't really know enough to know that was really, really, really bad. And I didn't do anything about it. But the next month, I went and got a test again. Here's the result. This was in October of 2020. And it had gone down a little bit, but it does that. It fluctuates. It was still 19, which is crazy, crazy high. And then I went again in February of 2021. And it was back up even a little higher. It was 24.65 by then. And then I got to thinking, I probably should go to the doctor. So I finally went to the doctor. And the doctor did a PSA test, and my PSA was 27. So he immediately did a biopsy and did 12 cuts on my prostate, and to check each one of them to see where the cancer was and how bad it was. And this is what he showed me. This is a picture of my prostate drawn by my doctor. So my doctor is obviously not an artist because my prostate is much better looking than that. But if you were a doctor and were looking at this, you would say, this boy is in bad, bad trouble. These are not good numbers here at all. This represents advanced and aggressive cancer. And so what the doctor did, this is actually what he gave me this piece of paper which told me, you need to go see a radiologist or a surgeon. Notice up there it says ASAP, right now. And this was in April of 2021, 2 years ago. So what did I do? You know what I did? I did what the Bible says. Look at this verse, James 5:14 and 15. Is anyone sick among you? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well, and the Lord will raise them up. So that's what I did. I called the elders of the church and asked them to pray for me. And then I left on a missionary trip to Mexico. When I got back, I still didn't go see a doctor, but I did check my PSA. And my PSA was at 23.68. And then that was in July of 2021. Then in September of 2021, I checked it again and it was 22. And I didn't feel like the Lord had released me, was giving me the right to do what the doctors wanted me to do. I didn't feel like I would be in the Lord's will to do what the doctors told me to do. I know that sounds crazy, but I didn't feel that way. So I was doing other things. I was doing anything that I could find to do. So I went again in October and got my PSA checked, and it was 20, almost 21. Then I went in January of 2022 of last year, and it was 21.82. Then I went in February, and it was 1904. So then I went to MD Anderson in Houston, renowned for their cancer treatment, and they did a PSA test, and it was 20. And they did a bunch of other tests, and they called me in and they said, Dan, listen, you have advanced and aggressive prostate cancer. It's out of the prostate. It's out of a sac that's around the prostate. It's starting to get into nerves, and it's going to be into your bones, and then that's the end. So I said, well, let me think about it. And they said, well, there's really nothing to think about. But the Lord gave me this verse. Look at this verse. Romans 14, 22 and 23. For happy is he that condemneth not himself in that thing which he alloweth, for whatsoever is not of faith is sin. So I didn't want to condemn myself by allowing them to do something to me that was not God's will. And so I didn't do it, and I haven't to this day. So I got my PSA checked again in March of last year, and it was 19, and then in April of last year, and it was 18, and then in May of last year, what's this? 2.24? Are you serious? Yes, the Lord had led me to some pills that lowered my PSA all the way down to this. And then I checked it. I thought nobody's going to believe this, so I didn't even tell people that it was at 2.24. I went and got my PSA checked again several days later, and it was even lower. It was at 1.4, which is way below what is acceptable, as you can see. And then I went on a trip to Mexico, got my PSA checked while I was going through Cuauhtemoc, Mexico, and look what it was. It was 0.32. That's not the whole story, but that's an important part of the story. When we trust God, when we put our faith in Him, God does miracles, God takes care of us. And I trust Him above all else. And I want you to learn to trust Him too, because He loves you and wants the best for you. God bless you guys.